Fast and Loud is no more. I have exited Discovery. I'm a free agent. When I signed my deal with Disco was almost 10 years ago. Social media didn't exist hardly. So I signed off on all media.
Picture this, a dusty garage in Dallas, Texas, the smell of motor oil hanging thick in the air, and two guys with grease on their hands and stars in their eyes, convinced they could turn wrecked metal into television gold. For most people, that would be a pipe dream. For Richard Rawlings and Aaron Kaufman, it became one of the most watched automotive shows in cable television history. Fast and Loud didn't just entertain people, it built a culture, launched careers, and turned Gas Monkey Garage into a household name from Alabama to Alaska. But then it was gone. No dramatic farewell special. No tearful final episode where everyone hugs it out in the parking lot. Just a quiet corporate announcement, a few polished statements from people whose lawyers had clearly reviewed every word, and then silence. 15 seasons. Over 150 episodes. Millions of devoted fans. And it ended not with a roar, but with a bureaucratic whimper. So what actually happened? How does a show that dominant, that deeply embedded in American car culture, just stop? The answer isn't a single explosion, it's a slow leak. A series of fractures, financial miscalculations, personal exhaustions, and strategic pivots that quietly drained the life out of something genuinely special. This is the real story of why Fast and Loud ended, told without the corporate spin. Part 1, the partnership that made everything work. To understand why Fast and Loud fell apart, you first have to understand why it worked. And it worked because of two men who shouldn't have made sense together but somehow did. Richard Rawlings was loud, charismatic, and relentlessly ambitious. He was the kind of guy who walked into a room and immediately started calculating how to own it. His energy was infectious, his hustle was undeniable, and he had a gift for making the camera fall in love with him. Richard could sell anything, a concept, a car, a lifestyle, and he knew it. From the moment Fast and Loud launched on Discovery Channel in 2012, he understood instinctively that the show wasn't just about automobiles. It was about personality, aspiration, and the romantic fantasy of building something from nothing. Aaron Kaufman was his opposite in almost every meaningful way. Quiet where Richard was loud, methodical where Richard was impulsive, and deeply, almost stubbornly, committed to the craft. Aaron wasn't interested in celebrity. He was interested in engines. He could look at a rusted, abandoned muscle car and see exactly what it needed, not just mechanically but artistically. His skill wasn't performed for cameras, it was simply what he was. And that authenticity was magnetic. Viewers trusted Aaron because he never once seemed to be playing a character. He was just a bearded guy from Texas who loved building remarkable machines. Together, they created a dynamic that felt genuinely rare on reality television. Two real people with real chemistry, working through real tension towards something they both actually cared about. The arguments were real. The pride when a build came together was real. The camaraderie felt earned rather than manufactured. In a genre drowning in staged drama and calculated conflict, Fast and Loud felt alive. That authenticity was the foundation of everything. And when it began to crack, there was no substitute strong enough to hold the weight of the show above it. The friction between Richard and Aaron didn't appear overnight. It built gradually, the way pressure builds in an engine that's running too hot for too long. And it grew from something more fundamental than a personality clash. It grew from a genuine philosophical disagreement about what Gas Monkey Garage was supposed to be. Aaron had been with Gas Monkey since its early days, when the operation was small, the stakes were manageable, and every single build mattered because there wasn't much margin for error. His professional identity was rooted in that environment. He cared about the quality of the work above almost everything else. If a build needed an extra week to be done properly, in Aaron's worldview, you took the extra week. Cutting corners wasn't a business strategy, it was a failure of character. His dedication wasn't theatrical. It was deeply personal. Richard, meanwhile, was operating from an entirely different framework by the time the show hit its stride. Success had expanded his imagination. Every episode that performed well, every licensing deal that landed, every restaurant table that filled up on a Friday night told him the same thing. Gas Monkey was bigger than a garage. It was a brand. And brands operate according to different logic than craft workshops. Brands think about scalability, about market penetration, about turning one successful product into 5. Richard wasn't wrong in that thinking, he was simply thinking about a different business than the one Aaron believed he was part of. What viewers watched as entertaining friction between two strong personalities was, beneath the surface, a genuine organizational crisis playing out in slow motion. Richard wanted to move faster, close deals sooner, and finish builds on schedules that served the show's production demands. Aaron wanted to slow down, get the details right, and protect the reputation of the work. These positions weren't compatible, and no amount of goodwill could bridge a gap that wide indefinitely. By 2017, Aaron made his decision. He departed Gas Monkey Garage and Fast and Loud in a manner that was professionally handled on both sides publicly, but the automotive industry is not a large community, and people who worked around both men understood that this wasn't a friendly parting of paths. Aaron's comments in interviews afterward were careful and diplomatic, but the subtext was legible to anyone paying attention. He talked about wanting to pursue projects that genuinely excited him, about returning to the kind of work that had nothing to do with ratings or brand strategy. He was describing, in polite terms, his need to escape the machine that Gas Monkey had become. The audience felt his absence immediately. Not in a dramatic, measurable ratings collapse, but in something harder to quantify, a hollowness at the center of the show that no amount of new cast members or exciting car reveals could fill. Every person brought in to fill the void was instantly and unfavorably compared to Aaron. That comparison was unfair to the new cast, but it was also completely inevitable. You cannot replace a genuine dynamic with a manufactured one and expect viewers not to notice. The heart of Fast and Loud had been removed, and the body of the show kept moving on momentum alone. Richard Rawlings was never going to be satisfied with one thing. That restlessness is arguably his most defining quality, and for a long time it served him extraordinarily well. But there is a version of ambition that becomes its own worst enemy, and by the mid-2010s, Richard was living inside that version. Gas Monkey Bar and Grill opened in Dallas in 2013, and it was, by any reasonable measure, a genuine success. The concept was smart: take the Gas Monkey aesthetic, the rock and roll car culture energy, and build a dining and entertainment experience around it. Fans came from significant distances to visit, treating it almost like a pilgrimage. The Dallas location became a legitimate tourist attraction, and it convinced Richard that he had found his next chapter. From there, the expansion plans multiplied rapidly. Additional restaurant locations were announced with considerable fanfare. Merchandise lines grew to encompass an enormous range of products: clothing, energy drinks, automotive accessories, branded gear of every conceivable variety. Licensing deals stacked up. Richard appeared at entrepreneurial conferences, spoke about building lifestyle empires, and positioned himself not as a car guy who happened to be on television, but as a businessman who had used television as a launching pad. None of this was inherently wrong. Leveraging television fame to build sustainable business ventures is a legitimate and intelligent strategy. But the execution created a problem that compounded over time. Every hour Richard invested in the empire was an hour not invested in the show, and every element of the business machine that appeared on screen diminished the show's integrity as automotive content. Episodes that had once focused entirely on the drama and craftsmanship of the build began incorporating promotional elements with increasing frequency. Characters casually mentioned the restaurant. Merchandise appeared strategically in frame. Storylines occasionally seemed constructed around whatever brand partnership was active that month rather than whatever build would make the most compelling television. The audience, which had originally tuned in to watch genuine car restoration, began watching what felt increasingly like an extended commercial for Richard Rawlings Incorporated. Some of the business ventures also failed, and failed expensively. Announced locations never materialized. Product lines launched with great enthusiasm and then quietly disappeared when sales didn't justify continued production. The economics of building a multi-platform empire are unforgiving, and Richard experienced that reality firsthand as certain ventures consumed significant resources without delivering proportional returns. This financial pressure created a feedback loop. The show needed to perform well to support the empire, but the empire's demands were compromising the show's quality, which threatened the show's performance. By the time this dynamic had fully developed, Richard was caught between competing obligations with no clean way out. People who watch reality television rarely think about the machinery required to produce it, and that's by design. The whole appeal of the genre depends on the illusion that you're watching something spontaneous and unmediated. But Fast and Loud, like every reality production of its scale, was a complex industrial operation, and that operation took a serious human toll on everyone involved. Between 2012 and 2018, the show produced more than 150 episodes across 15 seasons, not counting specials and crossover content with other Discovery programming. Maintaining that volume of output required constant production, cameras rolling almost continuously, build deadlines structured around episode needs rather than mechanical reality, and a staff expected to perform skilled technical labor while simultaneously functioning as television personalities. The mechanics at Gas Monkey Garage were working in an environment that combined two of the most demanding professional cultures imaginable: skilled trades and entertainment. On any given day, they might be diagnosing a genuinely complex mechanical problem while also repeating specific actions for different camera angles, maintaining awareness of their positioning relative to multiple crews, and performing emotional responses that producers believed would serve the episode's narrative arc. The technical demands of their actual job never disappeared simply because cameras were present. They simply added a second, entirely different set of demands on top. Accounts from people who worked in and around the production during those years describe an atmosphere of sustained exhaustion. Long weeks were the norm rather than the exception. Staff turnover was higher than in comparable shops, which is notable because skilled mechanics are typically loyal to workplaces where they've established themselves. People left specifically because the combination of production demands and regular business pressure had made the environment unsustainable for them. Richard himself was running at an intensity that could not be maintained indefinitely. Managing Gas Monkey Garage, developing and overseeing his various business ventures, fulfilling his contractual obligations as the show's star, maintaining a public persona across media appearances and social platforms, this was not a workload designed for human longevity. The energy that made him compelling to watch was real, but energy is not an inexhaustible resource. By the later seasons of Fast and Loud, people who knew Richard could see the wear beneath the performance. The production company, for their part, was doing what production companies do: pushing for more drama, more conflict, more reasons for the audience to stay engaged week after week. This is standard industry practice, and it is not inherently cynical. But in the specific context of Gas Monkey Garage, where the show's original appeal had been its authenticity, manufacturing dramatic tension was actively counterproductive. Every moment that felt staged undermined the very quality that had built the audience in the first place. Viewers are more perceptive than networks often credit them for being. By the later seasons, even casual fans were articulating in forums and comment sections that something felt off. The build seemed less ambitious, the relationships felt more scripted, the genuine joy that had characterized early episodes was increasingly difficult to find. They weren't wrong. They were accurately reading what sustained production pressure had done to the show's soul. Fast and Loud did not exist in isolation. It was a product of a specific era in cable television, and as that era ended, the conditions that had made the show successful changed in ways that neither Richard nor the show's creators could control. The rise of streaming fundamentally restructured the economics of the entire television industry, and Discovery Channel was not immune. As Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and a growing roster of competitors pulled viewers away from traditional cable packages, networks faced a brutal strategic choice: attempt to compete broadly across multiple audience demographics, or concentrate resources on specific franchises with the best prospects for surviving the transition to streaming-first consumption. Discovery chose concentration. They committed significant resources to shows with proven track records, dedicated fan communities, and formats they believed could translate effectively to on-demand viewing. Gold Rush, Deadliest Catch, and certain survival and nature programming fell into this protected category. Fast and Loud, despite its genuine ratings success during its peak years, did not. Part of the problem was demographic. The audience for Fast and Loud skewed older, loyal viewers who had followed the show from its early seasons but who were not the young, streaming-native consumers that advertisers paid premium rates to reach and that Discovery needed to attract for its long-term strategy. A show that delivered reliable ratings among a demographic that advertisers valued less was worth less to the network than its raw viewership numbers suggested. Contract negotiations between Richard's representation and Discovery executives became increasingly difficult as both sides recognized that their interests were diverging. Richard's team pushed for improved terms that reflected the show's contribution to the network's brand over 15 seasons. Discovery's team was focused on cost reduction and maintaining flexibility for new programming investment.